Julian Murphy and I, who was the co-creator of the show, we love making high concept series. A few years ago we made a show called Hex, which went out on Sky One, and that was the first time that we'd ventured into making high concept shows. And after that we thought we wanted to carry on making shows in extraordinary worlds, and we were looking at sort of pots of mythology to explore, and one area that was Merlin, basically, because Merlin hadn't been done, and we just thought Merlin was ripe for reinvention for the 21st century audience. And the great mythological stories of Merlin, there just seems to be lots of pots of stories to mine. So that was our starting point. Basically, we said, let's do Merlin. And then our next one was, what twist can we find? How can we reinvent Merlin? And what occurred to us was that Merlin we hadn't told the story before the Great Warlock, the guy with the pointy hat and the big long beard. Let's look at him as a teenager and see him discovering that he has magic. And that to us suddenly seemed like a very good idea. And at the time I was watching Smallville, which was a show that I absolutely loved, and I thought what was incredibly brilliant and inspired about that show was how they sort of turned the clock back and subverted the expectation of Superman and Lex Luthor and all of those things. And so that was kind of an inspiration for us. But we basically just started with young Merlin, and this young boy in a classic kind of Spider-Man sense of him discovering that he's got magic, and how does he deal with that? How does he deal with his extraordinary talent whilst at the same time being, a young kid, just like, Spider-Man. And then what happened is we then started building all the other characters around. So we thought, well, if we've got young Merlin, why don't we have young Prince Arthur? But let's not make young Prince Arthur the future King of England, this heroic figure. Let's make him an absolute idiot. So therefore we've got somewhere to go. We've got an interesting arc for him to go. So obviously in the early stages he was ridiculous and far too comic. And then we had to keep on remembering that we wanted to be epic and big with it. So we've just basically then rippled out these characters. So we had young Merlin, young Prince Arthur, the future King of England. Then we thought, well, let's get Guinevere in. And why, Guinevere is the future Queen of England. So let's start her off as a lowly servant girl, and then intrigue the audience as to how and when she becomes the queen. How does Arthur fall in love with her? How does she suddenly go from sort of low kind of working class roots to suddenly become this beautiful queen? So it's suddenly, to us, we had these great arcs that these characters could go on for hopefully many, many seasons. In season one you will meet bits of the legend, but if we just talk about the core characters, for example, we all know that Guinevere ultimately marries Arthur. So and at the moment, very early on in the series, you see that in episode 1, you see that Gwen is interested in Merlin and not Arthur. So again, hopefully the audience will be intrigued by how does that dynamic change? When does Arthur start having eyes for Guinevere? When does Guinevere start having eyes for Arthur? With Morgana, the name Morgana, we all, people will probably remember her or bits of her from the legend, but ultimately Morgana is partly responsible for Arthur's downfall. So their friendship will blossom, but ultimately we will know that Morgana will betray Arthur. What I hope that an audience will get from watching Merlin is that, to us, it's about telling action-adventure stories. So there are these interesting character arcs, and we do constantly tip a wink to the Merlin and King Arthur legends. But ultimately what Merlin should be is it's a fantasy action-adventure. Each week our core 6 characters go on these amazing mini-adventures. So each week it's a self-contained fantasy story where Camelot will be under attack, or one of our characters will be under attack, and we tell a great kind of action-adventure story, and then mixed up in that you will occasionally get a little bit of the Merlin or Arthurian legend will suddenly come into the story. Without giving anything away, we see the beginning of Excalibur. We learn some villains that are quite important to Arthur's downfall ultimately, when he becomes king, are introduced in the first series in unexpected ways. So I hope that the audience will be surprised by the unexpected twists of what we do with the legend, whilst at the same time enjoy really good self-contained action adventure. I think that the general reaction to the show has been fantastic, thank God. I'm still in a job. But we always knew that this was going to divide the audience in a way, because Merlin in legend is a lot older than Arthur. In the Geoffrey of Monmouth history books, Merlin took the young Arthur away. So he was sort of, 80, 90, and Arthur was a baby. So we have really played with the legend. So there will be sort of Arthurian people that will, that got upset with the way we played around with the history. But I think on the whole, people really enjoyed what we did with the show, because we were reinterpreting legends and giving it a modern twist. And I think people responded to that very well. I mean, I think the most we upset people was when we threw tomatoes at Merlin in the stocks, because lots of people decided that tomatoes at that time didn't exist. So I had to go on television and explain why we had tomatoes on Merlin. And sandwiches as well. There's a scene where Merlin gets a sandwich by Gaius in episode 1, and we got a lot of complaints about that. But they seem to be more upset about tomatoes and sandwiches than they were with what we did with the Merlin legend. So I kind of took that as a huge compliment. And I thought, well, hey, I've got a speaking dragon, I can have a tomato.
Keep the magic secret.